The manila envelope sat like a ticking bomb on my kitchen counter. My name scrawled across it in unfamiliar handwriting. I stared at it, my morning coffee growing cold in my hands. "Aren't you going to open it?" My husband Eric's voice snapped me out of my daze. I shook my head. "I don't know what it is. Could be one of those chain letters or something." Eric rolled his eyes and slit the envelope open with his car key before I could protest. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and scanned it, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock. "Honey, you need to read this." His voice was barely above a whisper. The paper shook in my hands as I read through the anonymous typed message. "Miss Leela Porter, your life is not what you believe it to be. The comfortable existence you've built was founded on lies spun by the ones you loved and trusted most. If you wish to uncover the truth, you must delve into your mother Marianne's past. Her untimely death was no accident." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Mom couldn't be gone? We had been estranged for several years, but I always expected her to reach out again eventually, to explain why she cut off all contact after. The letter slipped from my grasp, fluttering to the floor. My knees buckled and I crumpled into a kitchen chair, sobs racking my body. Lila? Eric was crouched before me, gripping my shoulders. "What is this about? Who sent that letter?" I choked back my tears, struggling to find the words. "My mom? She's dead. And this psycho says it wasn't an accident." Eric's eyes went wide with alarm. We both knew my strained relationship with my mom was a touchy subject I avoided at all costs. "Are you sure it's legit?" he asked gently. "Maybe it's just someone messing with you?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, it has to be real. I can feel it. My mom had enough skeletons in her closet to make a letter like this alarmingly plausible." Eric squeezed my hand. "Okay, let's not jump to conclusions just yet. We'll get to the bottom of this." The rest of the day passed in a blur. I called the Monmouth County Police repeatedly until an annoyed operator finally confirmed my mother had died 2 weeks prior in a house fire. The blunt way she relayed the information over the phone made it that much more gut-wrenching. By nightfall, I felt numb, empty, as if someone had carved out a piece of my soul, leaving a raw, gaping wound. I barely registered Eric heating up a frozen dinner and joining me on the couch with 2 glasses of wine. "I'm so sorry, honey," he murmured, wrapping an arm around me. His embrace was stifling rather than comforting. I pulled away, unable to process his pity. My mind raced with fragmented memories of Mom, the rare weekends she was allowed to take me to the shore after her bitter divorce from my dad. Her forced smiles as she introduced me to her new husband Patrick at our rundown apartment complex. The stream of disappointments and broken promises that eventually made me stop reaching out. Tears burned at my eyes again as one persistent thought echoed through my mind. I never truly knew my own mother. And now, thanks to this cruelly anonymous letter, I realized I may have missed my only chance to uncover her buried secrets. No, I couldn't accept that. If this letter spoke the truth, Mom's death wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of me finding the answers she never gave. I drained my wine glass and met Eric's concerned gaze with newfound determination blazing in my eyes. I need to find out what really happened to my mother, and I'm not going to stop until I uncover every last lie she was hiding. The next morning, I called in sick to Milburn High and arranged for a substitute teacher to cover my English classes. This search for the truth about my mother's life and death took priority over everything. After downing 3 cups of strong black coffee, I was buzzing with anxious energy. I pulled the tattered box of Mom's belongings out of the hall closet where it had sat gathering dust for years. The worn cardboard collapsed as I tore off the seal of packing tape, spilling its contents across the living room floor in a jumble. Rifling through the scattered items, a leather-bound journal caught my eye. Faded and warped from water damage, it nonetheless seemed to call to me with a sense of importance. This had to be the secret diary mentioned in the letter. My hands shook as I carefully opened the cover, bracing myself for whatever secrets Mom had committed to those pages. The first few entries were fairly banal, descriptions of her work at the daycare center, musings about her latest craft projects, scattered comments about missing her baby girl. Flipping ahead, the tone grew darker and more urgent. August 19th, Patrick's moods have swung again. He came home late from yet another business trip and started raging about money troubles. Claims he's playing catch-up from being short on his latest investment, but we both know his risky business ventures are covering up something more nefarious. My breath caught in my throat as I continued reading. Over the next few weeks, Mom's journal entries painted Patrick, her second husband, as an utterly monstrous individual. Each page revealed more disturbing accusations: infidelity, illegal money laundering, physical abuse, and implied threats if Mom ever spoke up. By the time Eric arrived home from his IT job that evening, I sat amid the scattered wreckage of Mom's belongings, journal in hand and face streaked with tears. He pulled me into a crushing hug. "Lila, what's going on? Please talk to me." I handed him the journal without a word. I watched his expression morph from concern to outright horror as he absorbed Mom's words and gathered the depths of Patrick's depravity. "That bastard," Eric growled after finishing the last entry. "I knew your stepdad was shady, but nothing like this." "We have to go to the police," I said with a fierce determination. The secrets in that journal proved Mom's death was no accident. Patrick had to pay for his sins. Eric shook his head somberly. "There's no hard evidence, just your mom's writing. The cops won't take that seriously enough to move on Patrick." My shoulders sagged in defeat. He was right, of course. We needed more concrete proof. "Then we find it," I stated bluntly. "We hire a private investigator or something. I don't care if I have to burn through every penny of my savings to expose Patrick. He's not getting away with this." Eric opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a stern glare. When he saw the intense fire burning behind my eyes, he simply nodded in resignation. That night, I scoured the internet for any private investigators or agencies that could aid my quest for the truth. An ad for a local Jersey firm called Granite 6 Solutions caught my eye. Their bold tagline, "No stones left unturned," resonated with my inner turmoil. I filled out their online contact form with trembling fingers. "Need to hire your services immediately. Suspect foul play regarding a recent house fire and death of a family member. Willing to pay top dollar for skilled investigator. Life depends on exposing the truth. Please contact at earliest convenience." After clicking send, an ominous sense of finality washed over me. There was no turning back now. I was forging a path toward justice for Mom, or outright vengeance against the man who destroyed her life. Only one of two outcomes would emerge. Either I would expose Patrick's vile transgressions and bring him to answer for his unforgivable crimes, or he would succeed in burying the full truth along with my mother's battered corpse. The latter was unacceptable. Tugging the quilt tighter around my shoulders, I clenched my jaw and settled in for a sleepless night. A war was about to begin, whether Patrick realized it yet or not, and I had no intention of showing mercy to the enemy. 2 days later, I stared apprehensively at the peeling green paint of the dilapidated house number 627. This run-down bungalow had been the address listed for Ray Porter in the private investigator's preliminary findings. My dad, a man I had willfully cut out of my life almost 2 decades ago. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening. Could I really go through with this? Dredge up old family wounds and somehow convince Dad to divulge what he knew about Mom's death? Before I could overthink it, I killed the engine and strode up the cracked front walk, each step fueled by a burning determination. I had to see this through, for Mom's sake. A petite woman with salt and pepper curls answered my sharp rap at the door. Her warm smile dissolved into confusion as she took me in. "Can I help you, dear?" I'm looking for Ray Porter," I stammered. "This is his address, right?" Understanding flickered across her face. "Oh, you must be Lila. Come on in, honey." She ushered me inside, down a narrow hall to a small living room. Faded family photos covered nearly every inch of wall space. "Ray, look who's here," she called out. Heavy footsteps approached, and then he was there. My father. I'd recognize those same sorrowful green eyes anywhere, lined now with age but still sparkling with the same gentle spirit I remembered from childhood. "Lila?" He whispered my name like a prayer, drinking in every feature of my face as if I were a mirage that could disappear any second. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Tears burned in my eyes, blurring my vision of this once familiar man, who was now an utter stranger. Ray's face crumpled, and he pulled me into a fierce embrace, clinging to me like a shipwreck victim grabbing a life preserver. I froze, utterly disoriented, before melting into his paternal warmth and dissolving into heaving sobs against his plaid flannel shoulder. We stayed locked like that for what felt like an eternity. All the resentment, anger, and ingrained betrayal I'd harbored for years toward my father crumbled to ashes in that moment. A dam of emotions I didn't even realize I had bottled up burst open with unstoppable force. Finally, Ray pulled back, his own eyes rimmed with tears. "Eva, can you give us a minute?" The woman? The woman, his new partner, I gathered, smiled kindly and gave my shoulder an affectionate squeeze as she exited to the kitchen. Ray steered me to a tattered plaid couch and handed me a box of tissues from the battered coffee table. "Tell me why you're here, Lila. Whatever the reason, I'm so grateful to see your face again." I dabbed at my eyes, struggling to find my voice. "It's about Mom." The words caught in my throat. Ray's expression shifted, a muscle tightening in his weathered jaw. "I never thought I'd live to see the day when you came around asking about Marianne," he said in a low, measured tone, "especially after you shut me out for good when you hit 18. Pain lanced through my gut. His subtle rebuke stung with the truth. "I know, and I'm sorry, Dad. I was so angry and messed up after you and Mom divorced. I took everything out on you instead of trying to understand." Ray waved off my apology with a calloused hand. "Water under the bridge, kiddo. Maybe we'll get a chance to rehash all that another time. For now, why don't you tell me what's going on with your mother? I've got to admit I haven't heard a peep from her in years." My heart clenched as I realized he had no idea of the tragedy that befell Mom. A fresh wave of sorrow slammed into me as I choked out the words. "Dad, Mom died. A house fire, just a couple weeks ago. And I think there's reason to believe it wasn't an accident." Ray froze, the blood draining from his face as the weight of my revelation crashed over him. A low, keening sound of pure grief escaped his lips. "No," he whispered, burying his head in his hands. "After all these years, not like this." I instinctively reached out and grasped his shoulder, our roles reversing as I now provided strength and comfort to my shattered father. As his sobs echoed through the living room, I clenched my jaw, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through me. If exposing the truth about Mom's death brought this much pain to my kind-hearted father, then her killer deserved to suffer 1,000,000 times worse. And there was only one man who could possibly be responsible, Mom's husband, Patrick. It was time to make that snake pay for his unforgivable crimes, no matter what it took. After leaving Dad's place, my head spun with fragmented memories and newfound determination. He had filled in some of the gaps about his bitter split from Mom, confirming my suspicions that Patrick's controlling behavior played a major role in tearing my family apart. Though gutted by the news of Marianne's death, there was a flicker of hope in Ray's eyes when I vowed to make Patrick pay for any wrongdoing. As if part of him still clung to the belief that justice could be served after all these years. I couldn't let him down. Not again. My mistakes as a confused, resentful teenager had already cost me too much time with my father. This time, I would be the mature, take-charge woman Mom had raised me to be. When I pulled into our driveway, Eric was waiting on the porch, poring over a manila file. He looked up expectantly as I killed the engine. "You'll never guess who called me today." I arched an eyebrow. "Who?" "Nate Edwards, the private investigator from Granite 6 Solutions." My eyes widened. I had nearly forgotten reaching out to them after discovering Mom's disturbing journal entries. Eric rose and crossed the lawn, handing me the file. "Looks like the guy started digging already, even before we officially hired his firm. That's initiative, I guess." I flipped through the contents, pages of photocopied documents, phone records, even some grainy surveillance footage. Nate had managed to unearth a staggering amount about Patrick's personal life and business dealings. Multiple banking transfers linked to offshore accounts in Belize, bank statements flagging numerous large cash withdrawals, damning evidence of Patrick's illicit money laundering and embezzlement schemes. "Son of a bitch," Eric breathed over my shoulder, scanning the paperwork with me. "Your scumbag stepfather has been laundering money for years. Probably got his hands in all sorts of organized crime rings." My stomach turned at the realization. I had suspected Patrick of indulging in shady business practices based on Mom's diary, but the sheer scope of his criminal activities was staggering. He had been building a veritable empire of corruption, and now a prime target painted on his back for anyone he'd wronged along the way seeking revenge. I turned to Eric, a chilling sense of clarity washing over me. "We need to hire this guy, Nate. If he's already digging this deep on his own, just imagine what he could uncover with full resources behind him." Eric nodded grimly. "Consider it done. I'll make the call in the morning and get him on full retainer. Whatever it takes." The next day, the doorbell rang promptly at 9 a.m. It was like the private investigator could sense my desperation. I flung open the door to reveal a trim, sandy-haired man in his late 30s. His eyes were keen and assessing as he gave me a quick once-over. "Lila Porter?" His voice was a low baritone, laced with a subtle Jersey accent. Added, "And you must be Nate Edwards. Please come in." I led him to the living room where Eric already had a pot of coffee going. After we all settled in with our mugs, Nate pulled out his file and spread out the documents and photos on the coffee table. "First off, I need to express my deepest condolences about your mother, Mrs. Porter. Her death, well, based on my preliminary findings, it seems highly unlikely to have been an accident." He launched into a methodical recounting of his discoveries so far, Patrick's money trails, his likely involvement with local organized crime, even some security footage capturing him meeting with known mob enforcers behind a Henderson diner. Cold anger surged through me with every unforgivable revelation. "We have reason to believe the fire that killed your mother was a premeditated hit, ordered by one of your stepfather's associates to tie up loose ends," Nate stated grimly. White-hot rage seethed within me. I could practically smell the bitter tang of smoke, hear the crackle of insatiable flames devouring all traces of Mom. Eric squeezed my hand, pulling me back from that dark abyss of fury. I took a steadying breath and met Nate's gaze, my own eyes burning with resolve. "So, what's our next move? How do we take down this sick, twisted bastard before he destroys anyone else's family?" For the first time, the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of Nate's mouth, a look of pure feral satisfaction. "Don't worry, Mrs. Porter. By the time I'm through, Patrick Logan won't be able to so much as sneeze without us having a paper trail to bury him for life." He spread his palms out over the damning dossier, eagerly awaiting my go-ahead. I didn't hesitate. Let's burn this evil son of a bitch to the ground. Over the next few weeks, Nate and his team at Granite 6 Solutions worked tirelessly to uncover every seedy detail of Patrick's criminal empire. Bank accounts, properties, safe houses, known associates, nothing was left unturned. I marveled at the investigators' meticulous tenacity. Nate practically moved into our spare bedroom, subsisting solely on pizza and Eric's industrial-strength coffee as he pored over files and surveillance footage deep into the night. Meanwhile, I channeled every ounce of my energy into putting on a mask of nonchalance around Patrick. A few times per week, I forced myself to endure his company at family dinners or gatherings, all while fighting the urge to go scorched earth and expose him as the venomous snake he truly was. One sunny Saturday in late April, Patrick insisted we all gather at his ostentatious McMansion in Westfield for an outdoor family barbecue. Code for him lording his wealth and status over everyone. When Eric and I arrived, trays of hamburger patties and hot dogs sizzled on an eye-wateringly expensive stainless steel grill that could feed an army battalion. Of course, Patrick had to spare no expense at displaying his money, even for the pettiest of events. "Lila!" "So good to see you, dear." Patrick released a noxious cloud of cigar smoke as he pulled me in for a loose, unwelcome embrace with his meaty arms. I struggled not to recoil from his thick musk of aged whiskey and hubris. Putting on my best media-trained smile, I extricated myself from his grasp. "It's great to see you too, Patrick. Your, mother would have loved a little shindig like this, you know." He flashed a toothy grin that didn't reach his dull gray eyes. "We should raise a glass in her honor." While Patrick busied himself pouring scotch from an obnoxiously ornate crystal decanter, I fought the urge to vomit. How dare he exploit Mom's memory like that, as if he hadn't just had her brutally murdered? I couldn't white-knuckle it much longer. The searing hatred brewing in my gut threatened to erupt with every pompous word that dribbled from Patrick's thin, deceptive lips. He passed around the tumblers of scotch, amber liquid sloshing carelessly onto the patio bricks. When he pressed one into my hand, I saw red. "Actually, you diabolical pig." The words escaped in a vicious snarl before I could rein them in. Patrick paused, the self-satisfied smile sliding off his puffy face as he registered my tone. "I'm sorry, what did you call me?" "You heard me, you twisted monster." My whole body trembled with pent-up rage. "I know what you did to my mother. I know about all your sick criminal dealings." Patrick froze, the hand gripping his scotch glass twitching almost imperceptibly. For a fleeting second, the bravado cracked, and something akin to fear flickered across his bloated features. But he recovered quickly, squaring his shoulders in an attempt to regain control. "Now, Lila, I don't know what kind of insane ideas you've been getting, but I suggest you watch your tone when speaking to me." His nostrils flared as he tried to loom over me with his imposing stature. I was utterly unfazed. Having endured years of his menacing bravado toward my mother, I now saw Patrick for the sniveling coward he was underneath the expensive suits and blustering ego. Yeah, that macho posturing may have worked on Mom, but it won't fly with me, slime ball. I jutted my chin out defiantly. I'm going to take you down and make sure you rot behind bars for the rest of your pathetic life for what you did to her. Patrick's meaty face flushed a mottled crimson, his lips twisting into an ugly sneer. For a wild moment I thought he might lash out and strike me down where I stood. But then his gaze landed on something over my shoulder, and the blazing rage snuffed out in his eyes, replaced swiftly by a mask of false geniality. Well, I didn't realize we had more guests arriving. His tone dripped with forced joviality as he slapped on a plastic smile. Come on over and join the party. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I whirled around. Striding across the immaculately landscaped lawn was Nate Edwards, flanked on either side by two grim-faced men whom I instantly pegged as federal agents from their rigid posture. Of course, Nate must have called for reinforcements from the FBI the second he detected my confrontation brewing. Patrick glowered at me for a split second before throwing back the contents of his scotch glass with a mirthless smirk. Your boy toy's got some brass ones, I'll give him that. I didn't deign to respond, keeping my gaze locked on Nate. A stormy sense of vindication surged through me as the investigators moved in to slap the cuffs on my stepfather's wrists. The reign of terror was over. Patrick's karmic retribution had finally arrived. Justice would soon be served, one way or another. Outside Patrick's palatial home, federal agents swarmed like locusts while a local news van idled on the curb. Crimson lights flickered across the meticulously manicured shrubbery as the reporters jostled for position behind the police barricades. Inside the marbled foyer, Patrick strained against the handcuffs secured too tightly around his thick wrists. Rivulets of sweat streamed down his flushed face as he attempted to maintain some semblance of dignity. You arrogant bitch! His veneer of composure cracked as he rounded on me with rabid fury. How dare you orchestrate this spectacle in my own home? I remained stone-faced, secure in the knowledge that his bloated ego was about to receive the brutal comeuppance it deserved. You have no one to blame but yourself, Patrick. This is merely the consequence of your decades of criminal atrocities finally catching up to you. He scoffed, shoulders heaving with rage. As if any of your paltry allegations will stick, I'll have my legal team eviscerate this nice little storyline you've tried to fabricate. Is that so? Nate's low baritone cut through the tension like a scalpel. The private investigator stepped forward, brandishing a computer tablet loaded with video files and documents amassed over weeks of painstaking surveillance work. With a few deft taps, he pulled up grainy security footage of Patrick meeting with several known mob associates behind a seedy diner. The timestamp confirmed it was from earlier that same week. Take a good look at this, Mr. Logan, Nate said, his voice dripping with cold malice. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the incriminating evidence my team has compiled. Patrick's veneer of bravado slipped further as he squinted at the screen, realization sinking in through his fury-induced haze. Sweat began beading on his brow as flashes of other recordings cycled past. Him delivering bricks of cash to hulking enforcers, illegally purchased firearms changing hands, even his hulking frame hunched in a sleazy motel room with a woman half his age who definitely wasn't his wife. Son of a bitch. His gravelly muttering barely rose above a whisper. His shoulders slumped in resignation, as if all the hot air had finally escaped his overinflated ego. In that moment, I pitied him, this wretched, hollow shell of a human who had once held such fear and power over me, now rendered utterly powerless and pathetic in the face of his own vile misdeeds. The front doors burst open, and a whirlwind of law enforcement swarmed inside, spreading through the opulent marble corridors to begin hauling out boxes of evidence and seized property. Their meaty hands gripped everything from garish modern art pieces to hollowed-out books stuffed with stacks of illicit cash. Amid the chaos, one grizzled FBI agent marched up to Patrick and leaned in close, his nicotine-stained teeth gnashing as he spoke in a guttural snarl. We've got enough on you to lock you away for multiple life sentences, sleazeball. Though from the looks of it, turning state's witness against your mob associates is the only way you'll avoid getting that big gut of yours ventilated on some prison yard. Patrick's Adam's apple bobbed as a shudder rippled through him. Tell us everything you know, the agent pressed with a menacing glare. Starting with what happened to the wife's remains after the arson job. My mother's remains? An icy chill gripped my heart before molten rage returned to scorch my veins. So the depravity knew no bounds with this degenerate scum. He had taken Mom from this world in an agonizing inferno, and then desecrated what was left of her mortal shell. I clung to Eric's arm, unable to trust my knees to support my weight against the crushing gravity of this fresh horror. Hot, furious tears blurred my vision as Patrick opened his mouth to begin confessing his unthinkable sins. A part of me knew I should turn away, spare myself from ingesting any more malignant, soul-shriveling revelations about the man I had inexplicably once called family. Let the lawman handle extracting every last filthy detail. But something in me remained transfixed, morbidly hungering to consume every wretched word of truth that might finally release me from the darkness of deception I had been trapped within for decades. So I watched Patrick's inflated mask of virility wither away to expose the quivering larva beneath. And I drank in the delicious beauty of his unraveling demise with an almost rapturous sense of cathartic release. At long last, true justice was being served. In the days following Patrick's arrest, I felt unmoored, untethered from any sense of certainty or equilibrium. While his confession to the FBI brought some twisted form of closure about Mom's fate, it also unleashed a torrent of fresh trauma to process. How could one man's reprehensible existence have inflicted such a gravitational pull of agony on my family? First tanking my parents' marriage, then robbing me of any real relationship with Mom in her final years, and finally orchestrating her agonizing demise purely to sever any loose ends that could implicate his criminal empire. Most nights, I barely slept. Visions of Mom engulfed in scorching flames invaded my subconscious, mingling with the horrific knowledge of what became of her remains. No child should ever have to visualize such waking nightmares about their parents' last agonizing moments. Eric tried valiantly to be my anchor during those dark days, but I still felt myself drifting unmoored across a vast void of emptiness. Only the prospect of ensuring Patrick's final, ultimate downfall gave me any sense of purpose to cling to. That pivotal moment arrived a few weeks later in a drab federal courthouse in Newark. I sat in the gallery wearing a crisp black pantsuit, my features carved from stone as Patrick shuffled into the courtroom, shackled at the wrists and ankles. Even that hideous burnt orange prison jumpsuit failed to diminish the malignant aura of ego and menace that radiated from his pores. As our eyes met across the courtroom, his lips twisted into a sneer of pure malice. "You'll get yours, you meddlesome little." His guttural threat was drowned out by the bailiff's barked warning. I didn't flinch. Whatever venom Patrick hoped to unleash could never eclipse the suffering he had put me through. The opening volley of his sentencing hearing unleashed a blistering fusillade of charges: money laundering, embezzlement, racketeering, drug trafficking, illicit weapons distribution. The list stretched on unending. With each new lurid criminal count, Patrick seemed to shrink into himself, the arrogant bluster chipped away by the implacable weight of his irredeemable transgressions. Finally, the fatal blow was delivered. "Furthermore, you are charged with capital murder in the first degree for orchestrating the arson and death by immolation of your wife, Marianne Porter." A guttural cry escaped Patrick's lips before he could stifle it. He slumped forward, straining against his shackles as great heaving sobs racked his hulking frame. In an instant, the formidable veneer of the ruthless crime boss evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a wretched, broken shell of a man desecrating what shred of dignity he had left. I watched with no semblance of pity as the living embodiment of all my childhood trauma melted into a quivering puddle of remorse and cowardice before my very eyes. Eric slipped an arm around my shoulders, but I shook it off, leaning forward to drink in every agonizing second of Patrick's downfall. By the time the laundry list of charges concluded, we had moved into the sentencing phase. Patrick seemed to shrink further with each damning recommendation from the cold-eyed federal prosecutor. In light of the staggering breadth and depravity of the defendant's crimes, from this court's estimation, he constitutes an ongoing sociopathic menace to society without any realistic path towards rehabilitation. I tuned out the precise verbiage of the prosecutor's acidic dressing down of Patrick's biohazardous humanity, simply letting the torrent of venom wash over me. This was Patrick's penance finally being delivered. A life arithmetic sentence of suffering to counterbalance every second of torment his litany of evil had inflicted upon our family. Given the manifest hopelessness of his soul, this court can discern no motivation for leniency regarding the maximum possible prison term. As the gavel thundered down with a boom of finality, sealing Patrick's fate, I let out the breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It was over. Really truly over. Eric gently squeezed my hand, concern flickering across his features. Are you all right? I didn't have the words to convey the complex riptide of emotions crashing through my being. So instead, I simply nodded and locked my gaze on Patrick's withered, sobbing frame being dragged away by the bailiffs. Staring into those dead, broken eyes, I knew Mom's spirit could finally rest in peace. And maybe eventually, mine could too. At long last, the karma had restored balance to our fractured world. In the aftermath of Patrick's sentencing, an unfamiliar sense of hollowness consumed me. For months, my singular driving force had been seeking justice and vengeance for my mother's demise. Now that it was secured, what was left? I supposed part of me naively expected to feel a profound sense of catharsis once her killer's fate was sealed. Like an anvil of emotional baggage would miraculously be lifted off my shoulders, freeing me to move forward unencumbered into a new chapter of life. Yet if anything, the great void left over felt more oppressive than the weight of the trauma itself. Achieving the vengeance did not magically fill the crevasse left by Mom's permanent absence. No punishment could ever make up for her being robbed from this world far too soon. In those first few weeks of unmoored purgatory, Dad became my lifeline. Eric encouraged me to lean on him as I slowly put the pieces back together. I started joining Dad and Eva for their weekly Sunday dinners, a ritual Mom used to cherish before everything went to hell. At first, my heart ached with every familiar home-cooked dish laid out on their battered kitchen table. Glazed ham, sweet potato casserole, all of Mom's well-worn family recipes. Smells that instantly transported me back to a simpler, happier time. Dad would squeeze my hand, his green eyes glistening with warmth and empathy as we made our way through those early, gut-wrenching meals. He recognized all the tangled layers of anguish I was wading through. Losing Mom completely, finally learning the truth about her fate, then having to process the sweet relief of justice achieved in confronting her killer. Gradually, as winter melted into spring, the rawness of those losses gave way to a quiet acceptance. I found solace in reconnecting with Dad and the family-centric traditions Mom had so valued, watching him and Eva bicker playfully over setting the table or swapping inside jokes about grandkids. I glimpsed flashes of the grounded, joyful domesticity that could still exist even in the wake of life's calamities. And for the first time it occurred to me that Mom, in her eternal, spiritual form, wouldn't want me and Dad stagnating in grief or dwelling on past traumas. She'd want us to keep living fully with open hearts, surrounding ourselves with those small rituals and loved ones that nourished the soul. One crisp April evening, following a jovial family game night, Eva hugged me tightly as we said our goodbyes. "I'm so glad you've been coming around more often, Lila. Your mom would be overjoyed to see you and your dad reconnecting like this." I pulled back, shocked to feel dampness pricking my eyes. "You really think so?" "Oh, honey?" Eva cupped my cheek, her twinkling eyes shining with compassion. "The most important people in our lives never truly leave us, as long as we keep honoring their memory through the way we live. Your mama's strength and resilience flows through you in such a powerful way." Those simple words were profoundly validating. For so long, the gaping void left over from Mom's death had felt unconquerable. Like a pitch-black cosmic abyss, I was destined to remain trapped inside indefinitely. But reframing her spirit into something alive and eternal that lived on through my actions, that shifted my entire perspective. Over the ensuing weeks, that subtle reframing helped catalyze an inner metamorphosis. The all-consuming thirst for vengeance cooled into a state of serene acceptance. While what happened to Mom was unforgivable, letting it consume me any longer would be an insult to the vibrant way she lived. So I channeled that newfound inner strength Mom embodied into my own life with a revitalized sense of purpose. I doubled down on my teaching career, aiming to become an inspirational mentor like the ones who had nurtured ME during those turbulent high school years. And when I wasn't shaping young minds, I simply tried to soak in each rich moment surrounded by the people who gave me strength. Eric, Dad, Eva, and even those crazy boggle game nights. Months turned into years, yet that internal ember stayed stoked, fueling me onward. I'd occasionally catch glimpses of Patrick's wretched existence rotting behind bars on the news, but it triggered none of the usual rage or darkness within me. just a placid sense of equilibrium, karma restoring balance to the universe. That void Mom's death left behind would never be filled in completely, of course. But I came to embrace the hollowed space as a profound reminder of how precious life remains for those of us still present and thriving. Her light may have been prematurely extinguished, but it endured in both my soul and actions daily. So while a piece of my heart would eternally remain cradled in sorrow over losing her, the rest of it steadily rebounded, open and hungry to fill with as much hard-won joy and purpose as this wild journey could muster. It's what Mom would have wanted, and that became the sustaining force helping me persevere one day at a time.